All right, you degenerates, welcome back to another deep dive. This time we're going balls deep into a topic that might seem like watching paint dry at first. The US-Canada border.
It's more exciting than you might think.
Yeah, but trust me, this shit's more fucked up than a soup sandwich. This is the longest undefended border in the world, and we're talking wars
Yeah.
over fucking potatoes, bootlegging bonanzas, and some seriously fucked up geography.
A wild ride, that's for sure.
You got that right.
Yeah.
We've got a metric fuck ton of intel on this bitch, and today we're going to dissect it like a goddamn frog in science class.
I'm your scalpel. Let's get to dissecting this monster.
Hell yeah, let's cut through the bullshit and get right to it. This border didn't just appear out of thin air, did it? How did this clusterfuck even happen?
Picture this. It's 1783, the American Revolution just wrapped up, and everyone's trying to figure out who gets what.
Right, dividing the spoils of war.
Exactly. They signed the Treaty of Paris, and bam, the first draft of the US-Canada border is born. But there was one tiny problem.
Let me guess. It was about as clear as a politician's promise.
Pretty much. It was vague as hell, leaving a shitstorm of confusion and disputes in its wake.
So they basically just drew a line in the dirt and called it a day.
You're not far off. And unsurprisingly, this half-assed border sparked a shitstorm of confusion and disputes. It was like a game of territorial Jenga, constantly shifting and collapsing.
So basically they just kept redrawing the damn thing until someone got pissed off enough to start chucking potatoes.
Pretty much. You're thinking of the Aroostook War.
Ah yes, the potato war. Bunch of drunk farmers throwing spuds at each other.
Well, not quite potatoes, but it did get pretty heated. A bunch of hotheads in Maine and New Brunswick thought they had bibs on some prime potato-growing land.
Of course, it's always about the land, isn't it?
Always. Anyway, they were throwing shade and stockpiling potatoes like it was the apocalypse, all because some dumbass surveyor couldn't read a map properly.
Classic government fuck-up.
Right. And get this. They even mobilized militias and built forts. One of them, Fort Blunder, ended up being built on the wrong side of the border.
You're kidding me. They built a fort for the enemy.
Yep. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Those poor bastards must have been pissed. So how the hell did they finally sort this shit out? Did they just give up and say, fuck it, keep your damn potatoes?
Not quite. After a few more treaty revisions and some tense negotiations, the borders started to take shape. They eventually established the International Boundary Commission to keep things in check and prevent any more potato-fueled conflicts. These guys are basically the border police, making sure everyone stays in their lane.
So basically they traded drunken surveyors for anal retentive bureaucrats.
Pretty much. But let's be real, even with all the treaties and commissions, this border's got to have a wild side, right? I mean, we're talking about thousands of miles of mostly unguarded territory. What kind of shady shit goes down in the shadows of this so-called peaceful border? Well, let's just say that where there's a border, there's bound to be some smuggling. And this border, it's seen more contraband than a pirate ship's hold.
Ooh, smuggling, you say. Now you've got my attention.
We're talking booze during Prohibition, weed, tobacco, firearms, you name it. They've tried to sneak it across.
Yeah, there's some hardcore smuggling action. Were they using secret tunnels, submarines, carrier pigeons?
You'd be surprised at the lengths people go to. They've used everything from hidden compartments in cars to underground tunnels to drones.
Drones, huh?
Yeah.
Now that's some 21st century smuggling ingenuity.
Yeah.
But hold on, you mentioned Native American territories earlier. How do they fit into all this border chaos?
Ah, yes, the sovereign nations within a nation. That adds a whole other layer of complexity. Take the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne, for example. It straddles the border.
Right, it's like their own little country right in the middle of everything.
Exactly. And their sovereignty makes law enforcement tricky as hell. It's a jurisdictional gray area, which, as you can imagine, makes it a smuggler's paradise.
So they're basically running their own smuggling empire. Sounds like my kind of people. But seriously, did they just turn a blind eye to all the illegal activities?
Not necessarily. They've had their own issues with the governments. Back in 2009, they even shut down a section of the border in protest. They were pissed about armed border agents operating on their land without their consent.
So they just said, fuck you, and shut the whole thing down.
Pretty much. They blocked the Seaway International Bridge for weeks, bringing cross-border traffic to a grinding halt. It was a major standoff.
Damn, those Mohawks don't fuck around. They know how to make a statement. So we've got confused map makers, potato wars, a fort built in the wrong country, and a Mohawk uprising. This border's more dramatic than a Real Housewives reunion. But let's get to the real meat of the matter. This undefended bullshit. How the hell can a border this massive be practically unguarded? Are they just letting anyone waltz right in?
It's not a free-for-all, but it's definitely a different approach than, say, the U.S.-Mexico border. Think less fences and troops and more shared responsibility and intelligence.
Shared responsibility. You mean like kumbaya and trust circles while terrorists and drug lords are sneaking across?
It's not perfect, but it's worked for a long time. They do have some security measures in place. Sensors, patrols, aerial surveillance. But the real key is the level of cooperation and trust between the two countries.
Trust between governments. Now, that's a novel concept, but you got to admit, it's a risky strategy.
Look, it's not as simple as that. They do have systems in place to address those concerns. After 9/11, security was definitely beefed up, more checkpoints, stricter border controls, increased intelligence sharing. But there's always this tension between keeping things open and friendly while protecting national security.
It's a delicate balancing act, to be sure. But with a border this long and this
Yeah.
unique, there's got to be some seriously bizarre stories. Spill the beans. What kind of weird shit have you dug up?
Oh, buckle up, Buttercup. We're about to dive into a rabbit hole of border weirdness that'll make your head spin. We're talking practical exclaves, split buildings, cross-border airports, and some shit that'll make you question the very fabric of reality.
All right, hit me with your best shot. I'm ready to have my mind blown.
Okay, let's start with practical exclaves. These are basically chunks of land that belong to one country but are completely surrounded by the other.
Wait, are you telling me there are Americans living in Canada?
Kind of. Imagine living in Point Roberts, Washington, a tiny piece of America that's only accessible by land through Canada. You'd need a passport just to grab a gallon of milk.
What the fuck? So these Americans are tracked behind enemy lines.
Well, not enemy lines exactly, but Canadian lines.
Close enough.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've got split features where the border cuts right through buildings, streets, and even a goddamn golf course.
A split golf course? You're shitting me.
Nope, I'm dead serious. Imagine teeing off in America and your ball landing in Canada.
Does that mean you have to declare it at customs? What a pain in the ass.
Maybe. But wait, there's more. We've got cross-border airports with runways straddling the border. You can step off a plane and instantly be in another country.
Okay, that's officially nuts. Are you telling me they built airports on the border? Why the hell would they do that?
Well, they were initially built during World War II to transfer U.S.-built aircraft to Canada without breaking neutrality laws. It was a sneaky way to get around the rules.
So they just flew the planes to the border, hopped out, and let the Canadians take over.
Pretty much. But here's the real kicker. They even had these things called line houses, buildings, with the border running right through them.
Hold up line houses. So, like, you could be cooking dinner and accidentally step into another country.
It sounds crazy, right? But we're just getting started. This border is a goldmine of the strange and the unexpected.
All right, you've officially blown my mind.
Hmm.
We need a moment to process all this border craziness. Don't go anywhere, you magnificent bastards. We'll be right back with more tales from the U.S.-Canada border. And trust me, the weirdness is just getting started.
Buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride. So remember those line houses I was talking about?
Yeah, the ones where you can accidentally step into another country while making a sandwich.
Well, there's this one building, the Haskell Free Library and Opera House.
Try saying that 5 times fast.
I know, right? But anyway, this place sits right on the border, smack dab between Derby Line, Vermont, and Stansted, Quebec.
A library and opera house. Talk about a culture clash.
You ain't kidding. And get this, there's a black line running right through the reading room floor.
A black line? What, were you talking like a crime scene or something?
Not quite, but close. It marks the exact location of the border.
So you can literally sit there with your ass in one country and your feet in another.
You got it. You could borrow a book from the U.S. side and return it in Canada without even going outside.
Damn, that's some next-level border hopping.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to explain that to a border guard. Oh, no, officer, I just wanted to return this book. Didn't realize I'd cross an international border.
I'm sure they've heard it all.
Speaking of absurd, what about that Canusa Street we talked about? The one in Beebe Plain, Vermont.
Ah, yes, Canusa Street, where the border runs right down the middle of the street.
It's got to be a logistical nightmare for the people living there. Do they pay property taxes to both countries? What if they park their car on the wrong side of the street?
It's definitely a unique situation. Imagine calling 911 and being told to call 999 because your house is technically in Canada.
What a clusterfuck. But we've talked about split buildings, split streets, even a split golf course. What else do they have? Like a Siamese twin town sharing a mayor?
Well, not quite Siamese twins, but there are some pretty intertwined communities, like those cross-border airports. Turns out they weren't just a wartime quirk. There's actually one still operating today. Pine Creek Border Airport between Manitoba and Minnesota.
So you're telling me you could just casually fly into Canada and walk right into the U.S.? That
Yes.
sounds like a security breach waiting to happen.
It's a pretty small airport, mostly for private planes and small commercial flights. But yeah, the runway straddles the border, and they have separate ramps for each country.
So you land your plane, half in Canada, half in the U.S., and just stroll into whichever country you feel like. That's some seriously relaxed border security.
Yeah, it highlights the unique nature of this border.
Unique is one word for it.
Ah,
But we've been focusing on the land border, but this border also cuts through water, right?
you got it. Great Lakes, St. Lawrence River, even the ocean.
Don't tell me they have split lakes and rivers too. Do they have international swimming competitions where you have to swim across the border to win?
Not swimming competitions, but there are islands split between the two countries, like Province Island in Vermont and Quebec. And get this, the border even cuts through a lake in North Dakota.
A lake. What the hell?
Seriously, they have some Canadian cabins on one side and the beach and boat docks for those cabins on the U.S. side.
So you're saying these Canadians have to cross an international border just to go for a dip in the lake? Talk about inconvenient.
It makes you wonder about the everyday lives of people living on the border. Imagine clearing customs every time you want to go fishing or have a beach day.
Yeah, that'd get old real quick. But all these quirks make this border way more interesting than just a line on a map. It's like a playground for geography nerds and people who love weird shit.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the people. Their stories are just as important as all the treaties and disputes.
Right, the human element. But you know there's got to be some drama. What about those Canadians coming down for cheaper health care?
There's actually a significant flow of people seeking asylum in Canada. Back in 2017, they had a surge of people crossing illegally from the U.S., mostly into Quebec.
Wait, people are fleeing the U.S. to seek asylum in Canada? What the hell's going on up there?
It's a complex issue with a lot of factors at play. It's about changing political climates and people feeling unsafe or unwelcome.
So even though it's the longest undefended border, there's still a lot of tension and complexity bubbling under the surface.
Exactly. And even though the two countries seem like best buds, there are underlying issues and disputes that haven't been fully resolved.
Disputes, you say? Now you've got my attention. What are they still bickering about? Did someone steal Canada's national hockey puck collection?
Nothing that dramatic, but there are a few areas where the border is still contested, like Makia Seal Island. Both the U.S. and Canada claim it as their own.
What's so special about this island? Is it some strategic oil paradise?
Not quite. It's a nesting ground for seabirds, but it's more about national pride and fishing rights.
Ah, the classic battle over who gets to catch more fish. So, what else? What other territorial pissing contests are they having?
Well, there's the Dixon Entrance, a waterway between Alaska and British Columbia. It's a strategic passage, and both countries want control over it.
Control, access. Sounds like some Cold War shit right there. Are they secretly building submarine bases?
Probably not nukes, but they do a lot of military exercises there. It's a reminder that even the friendliest borders can become flashpoints.
Okay, so we've got tiny islands, strategic waterways, and maybe even a few submarines lurking around. This undefended border is starting to sound a lot more defended than I thought.
And let's not forget the Beaufort Sea dispute up in the Arctic. That's where things could get really interesting.
Hold up, the Arctic. Now we're talking polar bears and icebergs. What are they fighting over up there? A lost hockey puck.
It's all about oil, my friend. As the ice melts, new shipping routes and potential oil reserves are opening up, and both countries want a piece of the action.
Ah, oil, the root of all evil, especially when it comes to borders. So they're drawing lines in the ice, dividing the polar bear territory.
It's more complicated than that, but you're not wrong. Then there's the Strait of Juan de Fuca down near Washington and British Columbia. They've been arguing about the maritime boundary there for decades.
We've got islands, waterways, Arctic oil, and now a strait named after some dude named Juan de Fuca. This border has everything. I bet there's even a lost city of gold hidden somewhere.
You never know. But the Strait of Juan de Fuca is a busy shipping route, and there are concerns about pollution, fishing rights, and jurisdiction.
You've officially convinced me. This border is a goddamn roller coaster. We've got history, quirky stories, international intrigue, and enough border disputes to keep lawyers busy for centuries.
And don't forget the human side of it all. The people who live, work, and cross this border every day. Their stories are just as important as the treaties and disputes.
Damn straight. This has been an eye-opening deep dive, for sure. We've gone from potato wars to strategic pissing contests in the Arctic. But what does it all mean? What does this craziness say about the future of the U.S. and Canada? Are we headed for a border showdown? Or will they settle their differences over a friendly game of hockey? Stick around, because we're going to unpack all that and more when we come back. Okay, you glorious bastards, time to wrap up this clusterfuck of a deep dive into the U.S.-Canada border. We've unearthed a mountain of bullshit, from potato wars to bootlegging bonanzas, from split buildings to territorial pissing contests in the Arctic. But let's get real for a second. What does all this border craziness tell us about the relationship between these two countries? Are they like a couple who are constantly at each other's throats but can't seem to live without each other?
Well, on the surface, they look like the best of buds, right? They've got that whole longest undefended border thing going for them. They cooperate on trade and security. They even share a commission to manage those pesky waterways.
Yeah, but we've also uncovered a whole lot of tension and unresolved issues. It's like they're playing nice for the cameras, but secretly plotting each other's demise behind the scenes.
There's always going to be some level of competition between countries, especially when resources are involved. But I think there's a difference between healthy competition and wanting to nuke each other off the map.
So it's like a hockey game, eh? They can slam each other into the boards, maybe drop the gloves for a good old-fashioned brawl, but at the end of the day, they're still sharing a beer in the locker room.
Exactly. And that's what makes the US-Canada relationship so fascinating. It's complex, it's constantly evolving, there's a lot of give and take. They're like two trees with intertwined roots, but they're still competing for sunlight and nutrients.
So you're saying we're not headed for a border showdown anytime soon?
Mm-hmm.
No tanks rolling across the 49th parallel?
I wouldn't bet on a full-blown war. They both know it would be a disaster. But there will always be flashpoints, those areas where things could get heated, especially as climate change and resource scarcity become bigger issues.
So maybe no nukes or tanks, but definitely some diplomatic headbutting. But let's zoom out for a second. What does this whole undefended border concept tell us about the idea of borders in general? Are they just imaginary lines drawn on a map by some power-hungry asshole? Or do they actually mean something?
That's a deep question, man. Borders are both real and imaginary at the same time. They've got physical markers, checkpoints, legal frameworks, all that jazz. But they also exist in our minds, influencing how we see ourselves and the rest of the world.
So they're like those optical illusions, those pictures. They can be two things at once. You can see the border as a wall, a dividing line. Or you can see it as a bridge, a point of connection.
You got it. And I think the US-Canada border is a perfect example of that duality. It's a microcosm of the whole world, where we're constantly trying to figure out how to balance our need for boundaries with our desire for connection and cooperation.
So it's not just about who gets the bigger slice of the Arctic pie, or who claims that tiny island full of bird shit. It's about figuring out how to coexist on this crazy planet without blowing each other to smithereens.
Well said. And in the end, the US-Canada border reminds us that borders are more than just lines on a map. They're living, breathing things, shaped by history, politics, culture, and all the fucked up shit that humans do.
Damn, that's some deep shit right there. I think I need another beer. But seriously, folks, if you take away one thing from this whole deep dive, it's this. Borders are weird, borders are complex, and the US-Canada border is the king of weird and complex borders. It's a constant dance between cooperation and competition, trust and suspicion. A reminder that even the best of friends can have their differences.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, you magnificent bastards, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We've gone from potato wars to philosophical ramblings, from split golf courses to the future of the Arctic. We've explored this fucked up border in all its glory, and hopefully we've learned a thing or two along the way. Till next time, stay curious, stay informed, and whatever you do, don't accidentally build a fort in Canada.